Hi, today I'm going to be talking about female vocal registers or registration. I'm sensitive to gender identity, so I just want to be clear I'm talking about those singers with a female larynx. What is a register? I'm going to read a quote from a very famous late 19th century voice teacher, singer, vocal pedagogue, Manuel Garcia. A register is a series of homogeneous sounds produced by one mechanism, differing essentially from another series of equally homogeneous sounds produced by another mechanism. So, what does that mean? It means that each of our registers have distinct sounds and feelings. And if you were looking inside the larynx, at the vocal folds and the rest of the larynx itself, and ascending on a scale, you would see changes in the laryngeal function, which would denote a change in a register. So how many registers are there in the female voice? If you asked several voice teachers, you would get several answers. So this is the way that I teach female registration. And this is the conductive model, so where we feel sensations. So the bottom of female vocal registration would be fritone. And we hear a lot of people speaking in fritone these days. It's not necessarily healthy for your voice. There are certain styles of music that do use it, throat singing, for instance. We don't use it a lot in classical singing, but it is a register, so we're calling it a register. Above that, we have chest voice. Above that is mixed voice. Above that, we have head voice. And above that, for some singers, we have Flajolet register, which is also whistle tone. In voice science, there are different names for these registers. The bottom register would be pulse, and that would be the equivalent of fritone. The next level would be lower modal, which is going to correspond with chest voice, and modal referring to where we speak. Above that, we have upper modal, which is going to correspond with head voice. And then finally, we have loft, like up in the loft, and that is going to correspond with the flageolet register. One of the biggest differences between male and female registration is the ability of females to truly mix. And this is possible through a large part of the vocal range, where for males, it's in a much smaller part of the range. Ideally in singing, we want to sound like we're singing with one voice. So we want to go through all of our registers, blending them, so they don't sound like they're different people singing. Unless we're singing into particular styles where we want to accentuate our register breaks, such as yodeling. So how do we smooth out our registers? The first step is finding where our registers are and where are those transition points. So Passaggio points, that's what we're going to call these. Passaggio in Italian means passage, and it means passage from one register into the next. The two main passaggio points for female singers is the first passaggio point, which is going to be the transition from chest voice into mixed voice, finding where your chest voice wants to end and that you want to start mixing. Above that, an octave above that, is going to be your second passaggio point. And that's where mixing goes into pure head voice. There are particular issues that can occur around passaggio points in the female voice. The first being the low passaggio point, where we're going from chest voice into mix. This is particularly problematic for younger singers who haven't developed their mixed voice or their head voice yet and have only sung in chest voice. I hear this in auditions a lot, when students will pick a particular piece and a couple of notes go outside of where they can comfortably sing in chest voice. And then there's a big crack that happens, and it's like a yodel. And so developing that mixed voice and bringing head voice down is really, really important in that process, and not trying to bring the chest voice up too high. The other issue that can occur is in the top passaggio point, when we haven't given way for the head voice to allow to bloom. So if we're singing an ascending scale, we meaning women, singing an ascending scale, and we're bringing too much chest into the mix, and we're bringing that higher and higher, we get to that passaggio point, or the pre-passaggio point, which I would say for a soprano maybe around a D going into the passaggio, is where the voice starts to get out of control, and the transition into head voice is almost impossible. So giving up control somewhere in that process of moving up and not trying to bring all that weight up and then suddenly transition into head voice. It doesn't quite work that way. So approaching the voice from an up direction, but also from a down direction, finding really light, pure head voice and bringing that down into the voice. One issue that can occur in the upper passaggio is intonation. And it's interesting, sometimes it's that if you're bringing chest mix up too high, it can cause the voice to be flat or under pitch. Another issue that can happen in the upper passaggio or pre-passaggio into that is that the tongue wants to pull back. And sometimes that there's not enough breath moving through the sound and the back of the tongue wants to take over. So doing tongue stretches while you're singing in your passaggio, upper passaggio especially, is really important in getting the tongue forward, getting the back of the tongue out of everything else and not getting involved in creating the sound. Doing lots of hooty sighs and bringing your voice down is helpful for that too. I like to identify students' passaggio points by having them feel that themselves. And it's easier to feel the lower passaggio point than the upper passaggio point. So I often will have a student start in a low place in their voice and chest voice, and then ascend and raise their hand or identify when they feel like they're not in chest voice anymore and they have to mix. Sometimes that transition's really obvious, and sometimes students can really negotiate that well, and it's much harder to tell when they're doing that. Some students haven't found their chest voice yet, some haven't found their head voice, and some haven't learned how to mix yet. So finding chest voice, I like to do this with speaking rather than singing and then translate that into singing. So feeling those conductive sensations, finding your chest bones here, and just speaking low in your range, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And once you find that, translate that into singing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Mix can be really easy for some. For some, it's just very instinctive. And for others, it's one or the other. And so using, again, these sensations, sing in chest voice, sing in head voice, and then try combining both of these sensations. Do less head, do more head, do an equal balance of both. Thinking about it like a recipe where you have 50% of this, 50% of this, then you change that ratio and you keep trying that. And I've had really good luck with students being able to develop a mixed voice based on that. But it's so crucial to bring head voice down, and then once you found the head voice in a low position, start doing crescendo exercises, really building low head voice, and then you're going to have a lot more ability to make choices. exercise that can be helpful in developing your low mix range or your low head voice and still keeping brilliance in the sound without that disappearing is starting on a back vowel, oo, morphing to o, which is going to have a little bit more brilliance in the sound, and then ending on ah, which is going to have more. And so we morph through these three back vowels, but ah being the most ringy of them. So if we're going ooh, ah, ooh, ah, and really being persistent in finding that ring in your voice and crescendoing into the ah vowel especially can be very helpful. A vowel modification exercise I like to do with some of my students with female larynxes is getting into the passaggio and opening up the vowel a little bit, especially from the inside of the mouth. So if we're going from E to I, A to E, A to ah, O to ah, U to O. And doing the same kind of fifth slide exercise and opening up that vowel up top, again, with most of the modification happening inside the mouth and just a little bit here. And it helps the voice open up and find a little bit more freedom rather than getting too compressed. 2, 3, The flageolet or whistle tone register is the highest register in the female voice. Mezzo-sopranos also have a flageolet register. It's just going to sit a little bit lower than a soprano's flageolet register would. For a soprano, that flageolet register is going to sit approximately from a D6 up to an A6. And a mezzo-soprano, just a couple steps below that. It's important if you are getting into the flageolet register to do this in a healthy way. Make sure you're supporting your sound and only attempt to do this on days where your voice is feeling really, really good. Also, I'm going to talk about this in range extension, but don't try to do the entire flageolet register. It's all about adding little bits at a time. If a student has an issue on a certain pitch, like say in their passaggio, upper passaggio, and it's falling flat or the vowel doesn't sound quite right, quite often it is the vowel. So I immediately do two different things. I do a more closed version of that vowel, and then I do a more open version of that vowel. So it tells me either that voice needed more front resonance or they needed more space. And so one of those things wasn't working. Something I find confusing, and you might too, is that if you ever watch any singing competition shows, the judges will always say, oh yeah, don't use your falsetto there, or go into your falsetto there. And they're talking about head voice, they're not talking about falsetto. And so we get really confused about what female registers are, male registers too, because people use the terms improperly all the time. I've found good success in the low passaggio point, trying to build mix voice, moving from chest into mix, not keeping the vowel so wide. So if we're moving from chest into mix and we're on a pure ah vowel, ah, it's really, really hard to bring that into the mix. So narrowing this vowel as we move through that passaggio point allows you to get into your mix much easier rather than having a big kind of gear shift. I think of these passaggio points as if you're driving a stick shift and you're going into a different gear. And that gear is particularly difficult if the vowel is too wide open moving through that. So we find a more kind of version of that vowel as we move through that passaggio point. There's more I could say about female registers, but I'm going to save some of that for the next chapter, which is going to be voice classification, and the upcoming chapter on range extension. Thank you so much for watching, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks.